At 3 a.m., in a sleek, modern home on the outskirts of Seattle, silence wasn't a sign of peace. It was the echo of prolonged helplessness. Thomas Blake, a senior software engineer at a major tech corporation, sat alone in the dimly lit living room, eyes sunken, clutching a mug of cold coffee. The house, once filled with laughter from his wife and twin sons, now carried only the ticking of the wall clock and a heavy, unshakable stillness. 8 months earlier, Olivia, the woman Thomas had loved more than anything, had passed away in her sleep. A sudden pulmonary embolism struck in the middle of the night. The next morning, it was Leo and Mason, their 5-year-old twins, who found their mother no longer waking up. For an adult, it was unbearable grief. But for two young children who couldn't yet grasp the concepts of life and death, that loss transformed into a shapeless shadow, haunting every night since. Since that day, Leo and Mason hadn't slept more than a few hours at a time. At exactly 3:15 a.m., like some eerie internal clock, they would jolt awake, screaming in terror. "The dark took Mommy," Mason once whispered, his wide eyes unfocused. "If we sleep, she'll come back and take us too." Thomas had tried everything: pediatricians, child psychologists, even a pediatric sleep treatment center. Nothing changed. The experts called it emotional trauma. They said it would take time, but time was slowly killing what was left of this family. Thomas, a man once known for his sharp logic and calm demeanor, now struggled to survive night after night. He was used to debugging complex code, solving critical systems failures, and leading global product teams. But none of those skills meant anything when facing his children's nightly breakdowns. Loneliness chipped away at him. The kitchen, once Olivia's domain for joyful breakfasts, now held only a cold mug and uneaten cereal. His hands trembled over the keyboard. Sleep had evaded him for days. But nothing hurt more than seeing his once joyful boys sit silently, their eyes vacant, bracing for something terrifying to return with the dark. And tonight, Thomas sat once more. 3:15 was coming. He knew what would happen, and he no longer knew how to stop it. Over the past 8 months, Thomas had tried everything to help his children sleep again. He'd read dozens of books on child psychology, consulted sleep specialists, even hired a mindfulness coach for kids. But every night, without fail, when the clock struck 3:15, the screaming returned from Leo and Mason's bedroom. He had gone through 5 nannies. Some quit after just 3 days. One broke down crying, recounting the haunted look in the boy's eyes. Several had impressive degrees and years of experience, but none could break through the wall of fear Leo and Mason had built around themselves. The twins weren't just struggling with sleep. They were unraveling. They became irritable, unfocused, terrified of the dark to the point of refusing to enter the bathroom alone. One nanny said Mason once screamed at the sight of his own shadow cast on the wall. At school, things were even worse. Their teacher called to report that both boys were constantly falling asleep in class, refusing to participate, and reacting violently to sudden noises. One day, Leo had a complete breakdown in the middle of math class because a window slammed shut. The school recommended Thomas temporarily withdraw the boys to pursue intensive treatment. But what treatment? What was left to try? He had taken them to 3 pediatricians, 2 child therapists, and even a pediatric neurologist. Every test came back normal. "This is a severe grief response," one therapist said. "The best thing you can do is be patient and make them feel safe." But Thomas didn't feel safe himself. He lived in a constant state of alert, as if he too feared the dark. Each night, he braced for the inevitable screams, never daring to hope that this might be the night they would finally sleep in peace. Once a man who solved the most complex problems at work, Thomas now felt like a father who couldn't save his children from something invisible but terrifying. He started questioning himself. Was he missing something? Or was there a force beyond his understanding haunting his boys? He no longer knew what to believe. Only one thing felt certain. If no one could reach them soon, the 3 of them would be trapped in this nightmare forever. And then, just when Thomas had nearly given up, when the darkness seemed to have swallowed every possible way out, a woman appeared, unlike anyone before her. No credentials, no grand promises, just a calm gaze and a gentle voice, soft enough to stir something inside a weary father's heart. Emily Castor arrived on a gloomy Saturday morning, 2 hours late for her scheduled interview. Thomas had nearly canceled the meeting, but something made him wait a little longer. When she finally appeared, her curly brown hair slightly windblown, shoes a bit muddy, dragging an old rolling suitcase behind her, he didn't expect much. She didn't carry a thick portfolio, no color-coded plans, no talk of certifications like all the others. But her eyes were different, warm, still, honest. And for the first time in weeks, Thomas felt his own breath slow down. "Mr. Blake, I'm so sorry I'm late," she said with a hint of embarrassment but no excuses. "I got lost." Thomas nodded and invited her in. As always, the boys hid behind their bedroom door, peeking through the crack with one eye to size up the stranger. Emily didn't call out to them, didn't try to coax them out. She simply placed her suitcase on the floor, sat on the couch, and gently asked, "Do you two like dragons?" That one simple question made Leo duck further behind the door, while Mason furrowed his brows, curious. "Because I know a few stories about brave dragons who guard children while they sleep. Real ones. No joke," Emily continued, her voice as soft as a breeze. Thomas was surprised, but he didn't interrupt. That entire morning, Emily never asked about their past, never mentioned Olivia, never used words like trauma or grief. She just told stories, vivid, imaginative tales about two dragon brothers in a misty kingdom who battled the fear of night with beams of light from their hearts. Leo and Mason slowly came out of their room, inching closer until Mason blurted, "Are dragons real?" Emily smiled. "They are, if you're brave enough to believe." There were no therapy frameworks, no behavioral charts, no psychological assessments. Just a woman who understood that sometimes what children need most is an adult who believes in magic. Thomas watched from afar, not interfering. For the first time in months, he heard laughter, weak, tentative, but real, escape from Leo's throat. A sound once familiar, now so rare it hit Thomas like a wave. After the boys drifted into a rare, peaceful nap, Thomas asked Emily, "What did you study?" Emily shook her head. "I don't have formal degrees. I grew up in a tiny town in Oregon. I'm the eldest of 7 kids. My mom worked 3 jobs. I learned how to care for others before I even learned how to read." She paused, then added, "I don't have certifications, but I have real-life experience. And sometimes that's what children need most." Thomas didn't respond right away. He never imagined that the person who might change everything for him and his sons wouldn't come from a textbook or a licensed clinic. But something inside him stirred, a flicker of light after months lost in the dark. From the very first week, Emily Castor didn't do what the previous nannies had tried. She didn't enforce strict bedtime rules, didn't turn off the nightlights, and didn't push for independence in the face of fear. Instead, she listened. She listened to Leo's shallow breathing as he tried to close his eyes. She listened to Mason whisper about the cold hands in the dark. And then she began to build a world where the boys were not victims, but heroes. "We're going to create a special ritual, just for Leo and Mason," she said one evening as they sat on the bedroom floor. "It's called the Ritual of the Night Guardians." Their eyes widened. For the first time, the word night didn't come with dread. It carried mystery. Emily pulled out 3 small pouches filled with colorful stones. She called them protection stones. Each one held a meaning: red for courage, blue for calm, yellow for love, purple for protection, and white for hope. She let the boys pick their own and helped them place the stones around their beds in a circle, a shield only they could see. "This is your magic shield," she whispered. "Nothing bad can pass through it." She replaced the harsh white light with a soft, warm glow. She hung tiny wind chimes on the window. "The sound of kind spirits," she explained. And each night before sleep, they picked a dragon story. A new adventure where Leo and Mason were always the stars. Emily didn't just tell stories, she lived in them. Each dragon had its own voice, its own personality. When Leo asked, "Do dragons ever get scared?" she replied, "Of course. But they know that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when you're scared." After every story, Emily guided the boys to close their eyes and take deep breaths, holding their chosen stones. She called it activating the shield. The room filled with the gentle scent of lavender, the soft gold glow of the lights, and the quiet music of chimes dancing with the Seattle breeze. The first night, the boys still woke up at 3:15, but this time no screaming. Mason whispered, "Miss Emily," the shadow came again. Emily held him, stroked his hair, and reminded him, "The shield is still here. The dragons are watching." They fell asleep again. The second night, they slept almost 5 hours straight. The third, 6 hours. The whole house was in disbelief. Thomas, for the first time in months, drifted off on the sofa instead of waiting for the familiar screams. He watched his sons begin to look forward to bedtime. Not because they were tired, but because they were excited to choose a new story, hear the dragons roar in Emily's voice, and activate their shields with their tiny hands. Thomas asked her, "What are you doing? How are you calming them with just stones and stories?" Emily smiled softly. "It's not the stones or the stories that hold the magic. It's that they're part of their own protection. They're not victims of fear anymore. They're warriors in their own story." Thomas said nothing. He had never heard anyone speak about fear like that. Thomas began to change in ways he didn't fully notice. He started coming home earlier, spending more time in the kitchen, not just to check on the kids, but to listen to Emily's voice as she read stories. There was something in the way she interacted with Leo and Mason that he couldn't look away from. She never imposed, never commanded. She was patient, gentle, and completely present in every moment. On quiet nights, after the shield activation and the final dragon tale had lulled the boys to sleep, Thomas and Emily often sat in the living room, sipping tea and talking. At first, the conversations were only about the children, but gradually they became more personal. Emily spoke of her childhood in rural Oregon, about long days caring for her younger siblings while her mother worked multiple jobs. Thomas shared stories of Olivia, his late wife, and how she had once been the center of their little world. These memories didn't hurt, they connected. Both had lost something. Both were trying to find their way back to the light in their own way. One night, just as Leo was about to fall asleep, he asked, "Miss Emily, can you stay here forever?" Emily smiled. "I'm here now, little one." Mason chimed in, "Not just tonight, forever, like a mom." Thomas stood frozen in the doorway. From that night on, the questions came more often, innocent, yet gut-wrenching in their sincerity. "Can you be our new mom? Dad, do you like Miss Emily? Will Miss Emily tell us dragon stories forever, even when we grow up?" Thomas knew he was entering unfamiliar ground, where feelings could no longer be ignored. He began to look forward to the evenings, not just to see his children thriving, but to sit beside Emily, to hear her laugh when Mason demanded to be the dragon chief, or when Leo corrected her for mixing up a character's name. One night, as she folded blankets after story time, Thomas softly said, "You've brought life back into this house." Emily looked at him, her eyes warm but unhurried. She knew what was forming, but she also knew the pain still lingered. They didn't speak again that night, but something had shifted. In the silence, there was something real, an unspoken truth that both of them understood. If love had a natural place to grow, it was here. The feelings between Thomas and Emily were no longer vague. They lingered in the way they looked at each other while watching Leo and Mason sleep peacefully, in the quiet moments where no words were needed, in the fleeting smiles when their hands brushed accidentally while tidying up toys. But both were cautious. Thomas was still tethered to the memory of Olivia, not as a haunting shadow, but as a fear of forgetting someone who once meant everything. He wasn't sure if moving on would feel like betrayal. He feared the look in his son's eyes if they thought he was replacing their mother. And Emily, though she could feel the bond growing stronger each day, didn't allow herself to hope. She was the outsider, the employee, the one who came after, and she knew that love, especially the kind that rises from grief, cannot be rushed. Between them stood a quiet understanding, a small space, not wide but just enough to remind them that while the heart may want to move forward, healing still takes time. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Leo and Mason were sleeping better each night. Laughter was beginning to echo again in the house. Thomas felt lighter every time he walked through the front door, but amidst the wind chimes and the warmth of dragon tales, something remained unspoken. the quiet love growing between him and Emily. One night, after the boys had fallen asleep, Emily stayed a little longer than usual in the living room. There was no dragon story, no ritual, just two adults and a silence that no longer felt comfortable. "Thomas," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know I probably shouldn't say this, but I think I've grown to care too much about you three." Thomas froze. Her words didn't surprise him, because he felt the same, but he couldn't answer. Part of him wanted to hold her, to thank her for breathing life back into their home, but another part still carried the weight of guilt. "I don't know if I'm allowed to be happy again," he said after a long pause. "Olivia, she's a part of every memory we have. I'm afraid that moving forward might hurt her, might hurt the boys." Emily nodded, her eyes full of understanding, but also sadness. She stood up, wished him good night, and quietly walked back to her room, as if the conversation had never happened. But from that moment on, things between them were no longer the same. Leo and Mason noticed first. Emily didn't tell stories with the same animated voice. Thomas stopped waiting in the living room after bedtime. Meals became oddly silent. One night, Leo wet the bed for the first time in weeks. When Thomas came in to help him change, the boy asked softly, "Dad, when grown-ups act weird, does it mean someone's going to leave?" The question cut straight through Thomas like a blade. He knelt down and looked his son in the eyes. "Why are you asking that?" "Because Miss Emily and you don't talk anymore," Mason whispered from the other bed. "She's sad. You're sad. And last time, when Mom was sad, she left forever." Thomas felt like the air had been knocked from his chest. He realized his silence, his unresolved fear, were starting to undo everything Emily had worked so hard to heal. The next morning, as Emily was heading out to the market, Thomas stepped in front of the door. There was no hesitation in him anymore. "We need to talk," he said. His voice no longer trembled. Thomas closed the door as Emily turned to leave. She startled slightly, looking up at him, her eyes still gentle but cautious. "I'm sorry," Thomas said, "for the silence, for the fear I wasn't brave enough to name." Emily didn't respond, but she didn't walk away either. She stood quietly, waiting. Leo and Mason, they can feel something's wrong. They're scared. Scared that if adults are sad, someone's going to leave, and I can't let that happen again. He exhaled, his eyes slightly red. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. You're part of this family now. You didn't just help the boys sleep again. You healed all of our hearts." Emily blinked. His words felt like a warm breeze, gentle, yet enough to make her heart tremble. "I don't know where this will go either," she replied softly. "But no matter what happens, I will stay. Not out of duty, but because I love you, and I love them." That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Thomas opened a small box from his desk drawer. There were no roses, no glittering diamonds, just a simple silver bracelet engraved with 3 names: Thomas, Leo, Mason. "I don't know the perfect way to say this," he began, his hand slightly shaking, "but I want you to become an official part of this family." He paused, then added, "Not because the boys love you, though they do. Not because you fixed our nights, though you did, but because you gave me something I thought I had lost forever: the courage to hope again." Emily stayed silent for a long moment, tears quietly trailing down her cheeks. "I say yes," she whispered, "but on one condition: we make sure Leo and Mason are truly ready. They've already lost a mother. I never want them to feel like I'm replacing that." Thomas nodded. "We'll do it their way." And so they waited, not for a perfect moment, but for a peaceful one. When Leo and Mason began calling her Mommy Emily without hesitation, they knew it was time. The next day, the 4 of them sat together in the boys' room, under the soft glow of the yellow lights, surrounded by wind chimes and colorful stones. Emily began a new story, gentle, magical. Once upon a time, there was a brave dragon father who lived in a castle above the clouds. He raised 2 wild and courageous little dragons. One day, a guardian arrived, not to replace the dragon mother who was gone, but to protect the castle and love the little dragons as her own. Leo sat up, Did the dragon dad marry her? Thomas smiled. Only if the little dragons agreed. Mason nodded firmly. If she promises to tell dragon stories forever, then yes. Emily met Thomas's eyes. In that moment, both of them knew they had been accepted in the truest way, through the hearts of the children. From that moment on, everything began to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but through the little things. More laughter at breakfast, longer hugs at bedtime, and a strange warmth settling quietly into every corner of the house. Family was no longer a vague idea. It was something real, built slowly with love. They held a simple wedding, no extravagance, no crowd, just a gentle afternoon surrounded by a few close people who truly understood the journey they had taken. There was no grand dress, no cathedral. Emily wore a plain white gown and carried a bouquet of wildflowers handpicked by Leo and Mason. Thomas wore a blue tie, the color Olivia had once loved. As he tied it that morning, his hands trembled. Not from doubt, but from the weight of memory. It wasn't about replacing her, it was about honoring what had been, while embracing what could be. In a quiet corner of the room stood a small table draped in white linen, with a framed photo of Olivia placed lovingly among fresh flowers. No one spoke of her with sadness, but with gratitude. Because without Olivia, there would be no Leo and Mason, and without that painful chapter, Thomas would never have met Emily. There were no scripted vows, just a shared look and a promise to always put family first. Leo and Mason each carried a ring, their little hands trembling with excitement, eyes glowing with joy. When the rings were exchanged, both boys shouted together, "Now we have a real dragon family!" Everyone laughed, even those who had shed tears at the sight of Olivia's photo, because in that moment it was clear the past hadn't been erased, it had been honored, so that something new could begin. From that day forward, Thomas's house seemed to breathe differently. Mornings began with the smell of pancakes on the stove, and evenings ended with laughter echoing down the hallway. Emily was no longer the nanny. She was naturally woven into the fabric of the family. She helped pick out outfits for Leo and Mason, scribbled notes in the school communication book, and somehow remembered exactly which boy liked chocolate milk and which didn't. Thomas felt lighter with each passing day. He no longer had to suppress his feelings or pretend to be strong. When he came home and saw Emily teaching the boys how to fold paper airplanes or tying her hair up while cooking dinner, he knew one thing for sure. He had found the home he thought he had lost forever. As for Emily, she never had to try to be loved. Leo and Mason's affection for her grew naturally, as if children's hearts instinctively recognize those who stay out of love. They started calling her Mommy Emily. No one told them to, no one coached them. It just felt right. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. They argued over who forgot the laundry or who burned the toast, but they made up with hugs or with a new dragon story at bedtime. Their family didn't look like anyone else's, but it was whole in its own way. And just like that, a new chapter began. Not to replace the past, but to build something honest from everything left unfinished. Emily had never imagined that one day, the little stories told in a bedroom haunted by loss could inspire others. It all started when a teacher at Leo and Mason's school, after hearing the boys talk about the magic shield and sleep-guarding dragons, asked if Emily could speak at a parent gathering. "We have many children coping with grief," the teacher said. "What you did, it seems to truly touch their hearts." Emily agreed, nervous but prepared. She brought the same things that once brought peace to Leo and Mason. A few colored crystals, some dried lavender, and fairy tales. From that first small talk, Emily began receiving invitations to larger workshops, places where she didn't speak with theory, but with lived experience. She never promised healing, only shared how she once chose to listen to fear instead of silencing it, how she helped children build their own safe shield so they could finally close their eyes each night in peace. "Not every child needs medicine," she said. "Sometimes they just need someone patient enough to sit beside them and believe they'll make it through." After every talk, there were always people who stayed behind, to ask more, to say thank you, or simply to cry. Emily never saw herself as an expert. She was just someone who once held a trembling child's hand and never let go until the nightmare passed. As time passed, the wound slowly healed, not through forgetting, but through the love rebuilt day by day. And then, on an ordinary afternoon, this family sat together to write the final pages of a story that once began with haunted nights and tearful dreams. The whole family gathered around the big wooden dining table to start a special project. A memory album from the day Emily walked into their lives. Thomas laid out old photographs, pictures of the boys quietly listening to Emily's first dragon story, snapshots of their earliest laughter over breakfast pancakes. Emily brought stickers, colorful paper, and a box of crayons Mason called magic wands. "This one is when we made our first sleep shield," Leo pointed, his eyes lighting up. "And this one's when Mom Emily made warm tea with lavender," Mason added. "And here's when we told bedtime stories and Dad fell asleep halfway through." Laughter filled the living room, gentle, real, like a song that had waited far too long to be sung. Then Leo carefully glued a big photo to the final page. In the picture, the whole family stood in front of the house. Thomas with his arm around Emily, Leo and Mason hugging her from either side, all smiling brightly. "I wrote something," Leo said, his voice small but certain. "Now we're not afraid to sleep anymore, because Dad and Mom Emily protect us, and Mom Olivia watches us from the sky." Thomas felt his throat tighten. He pulled his sons into a hug and looked at Emily, the woman who came like a quiet miracle. She hadn't replaced Olivia. She had helped them open their hearts again. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up, for choosing to stay." Emily smiled, tears gently falling down her cheeks. The album was placed on the bookshelf in the living room, not just a collection of photos, but proof of something simple and extraordinary. Love doesn't erase the past, but it can heal it by creating a new present. A family, a second chance, and a love built on patience, understanding, and bedtime stories beneath a soft lamp glow. A few months after their simple wedding, on a sunny early morning, Emily sat on the wooden chair by the kitchen window, gently cradling her belly, her eyes filled with emotion. In her hand was a pregnancy test, two clear pink lines glowing with quiet magic. Thomas walked in, still in his pajamas, holding a steaming mug of coffee. He paused when he saw her sitting silently, her gaze glistening. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Emily didn't answer right away. She simply handed him the test, clasped his hand and whispered, her voice trembling, "We're having 2 baby girls. I'm pregnant with twins." Thomas stood frozen for a moment. Then he knelt down, pressing his face to her belly, holding her like he never wanted to let go. Tears filled his eyes, tears of a man who once thought he had lost everything. When they shared the news, Leo and Mason jumped up and down in excitement. "I want to name one of them," Mason shouted. "Not fair. I want to too," Leo argued. Emily laughed. "Then each of you can name one, but the names have to be beautiful and strong, like dragon warrior princesses." Throughout the pregnancy, the whole family spun in a whirlwind of love and preparation. Thomas learned to cook all of Emily's favorite cravings. Every night, the boys took turns listening to the babies through her belly. They drew pictures, wrote letters for their future sisters, and carefully picked tiny protection stones to make baby-sized sleep shields. On the day the girls were born, soft rain fell over Seattle. Inside the warm hospital room, 2 tiny girls came into the world, Clara and Sophie, names chosen by their big brothers, representing light and hope. Thomas held Clara in his arms while Emily cradled Sophie against her chest. The babies slept peacefully, their rosy cheeks calm and content, as if they had always belonged here. Leo and Mason stood proudly by the bed, eyes wide in awe. Mason whispered, "I'll protect them, the way Dad protects Mom, and Mom tells stories to us." The days that followed became a symphony of baby cries, warm milk, and endless laughter. Thomas, now a father of 4, fumbled adorably, but gave his all. Emily, though tired, never lost the gentle grace that had once saved this family. And Leo and Mason, once terrified of the dark, had become the proudest big brothers, helping with diapers and humming lullabies at bedtime. One quiet afternoon, the 6 of them sat in the backyard under a curtain of wisteria. Emily held Sophie. Thomas cradled Clara. Leo and Mason sat on either side, each with a dragon book in hand, pretending to teach their baby sisters. The breeze whispered through wind chimes, and golden sunlight kissed their hair. No one said a word, but everyone felt it. Family isn't just a place to return to. It's where pain is healed and love keeps growing. And now Thomas, Emily, Leo, Mason, Clara, and Sophie were truly whole.